I'm Lindsay Konzak. I'm editor of Modern Distribution Management, and I'm here with Jonathan Byrnes today. He is a senior lecturer at MIT and author of the recent book, Islands of Profit in a Sea of Red Ink. He is president of Jonathan Byrnes & Company, a consulting company with which he has advised over 50 major companies, medical institutions, and industry associations. How are you doing today, Jonathan?
I'm doing very well. Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you for inviting me to speak with your group.
Could you briefly explain the premise of your book that 40% of every business is unprofitable?
This is something that came out of 20 years of working primarily with distribution companies. And what I found in virtually every company that I've seen, both in distribution and in other businesses, is really astonishing. That 30 to 40% of the business is unprofitable by any measure at all. And it's not something that's very sensitive. It's just simply out there. And 20 to 30% is providing all of the reported profits and subsidizing the losses. I think for me, the best way to put my finger on it is that if I went into a company and I picked out 5 customers at random, and then in each customer I picked out 5 products at random that they were buying, and I were to say these 25 customer product sets, is each profitable or not, virtually no company could tell me accurately whether it is or isn't. That's really the telling acid test. The basic problem is that all of our management information and our business processes were developed for a prior business era that I call the age of mass markets. And consequently, our accounting categories are much too broad. Revenues are controlled broadly and cost broadly to see which accounts and products are profitable and which ones aren't. So people simply assume that more revenues equals more profits. And in the old days, the age of mass markets, when volume was the name of the game and we had uniform pricing and uniform cost to serve, we were just dropping things off at the receiving dock. Volume did equal profits. Today it's really completely different. Some of our revenues are very profitable and a surprising portion provide and produce big losses because we have very different pricing for different products and different customers, and different degrees of integration and different costs to serve, special needs for some customers. So there's a need to match revenues and costs on a very, very granular basis, and our accounting systems don't allow us to do this. In virtually all companies, in addition, and really importantly, no one is responsible for monitoring and managing the interaction of revenues and costs at this grassroots product customer level in order to maximize profits. So I've written about this for pretty close to 20 years, and nobody disagrees. The problem that people have is that they don't know what to do about it. The first instinct is to say, oh my goodness, if 40% of my company is unprofitable, how can I just fire 40% of my customers? Isn't that going to hurt my stock price? And the answer is, well, you'd never do that, and of course it'll hurt your stock price. You want to do other things that are positive. The deeper question that people ask is, what can I do about it, which is what my book, Islands of Profit in the Sea of Red Ink, is all about. And there really are 4, if you condense it down, 4 things to get right. The first is the right information. It has to be granular, specific products and specific customers, not aggregated. And I explain how to do that through a technique called profit mapping. Second, the right priorities. Most people's instinct is to look at the unprofitable piece of the business. My message is secure and grow the islands of profit, because if you lose those, you're dead. And in most companies, they are overpricing and underserving their best customers because they're doing everything on average. And that means that the money-losing customers are being underpriced and overserved. The third is the right processes. There are ways that I describe to get sales, marketing, and operations on the same page with standard relationships for different customers, matching customers to relationships in a pretty careful way. That's the key to getting costs under control and growing revenues. And finally, the right compensation, especially for sales, matching compensation to real profitability and not just to revenues.
What misconceptions do distributors have about improving profitability in their business?
I think that the number one issue is that you don't know what you don't see. Virtually everybody thinks that if you make or exceed budget, you've done a great job. The problem is that everybody in the company can exceed their budget goals, and the company will still be much less profitable than it might otherwise be. Budgets are developed and performance is judged relative to history and not relative to potential. So if a company is, let's say, 30 to 40% unprofitable and the budget aims for a 10% improvement, and somehow everybody gets a 15% improvement, they celebrate, but there's still a huge amount of embedded unprofitability. So when you look at budgets, when you look at capital budgets and budget requests, you can judge what you see, but you can't judge whether you're seeing the right things.
What are some of the obstacles preventing distributors from taking the first steps to improve their profitability?
There are a couple of common mistakes that people make. The first one is assuming that more revenues means more profits. 30 and 40 years ago, that was absolutely true. Today, it's completely incorrect. The second big issue is failing to focus attention and resources on securing and growing the islands of profit, the sweet spot, the part of the business that produces high sustained profitability. This makes a company vulnerable to competitors who are going after the sweet spots, and I think that's probably the most critical issue. And the third is failing to put anyone in charge of maximizing account and product profitability at the grassroots level, which means matching revenues and budgets on a very, very granular basis. The underlying issues is that people typically can't figure out where they're profitable and where they're not, and they're not clear about what to do. Consequently, they default into incenting people to chase all revenues and reduce all costs.
When taking the first steps then to improving profitability, when you get over those obstacles, are there some worst practices to avoid?
Yes, there are two really big ones, and they're really assumptions. The first is the assumption that you have to fire customers and get rid of products. That's completely untrue. What you want to do is understand where you're making profits and grow that piece of the business and secure it and give it the right service, and then divert your resources from the marginal parts to the parts that are very growable. I've worked with companies that have had huge increases in share of wallet, market share, and profitability all at the same time by understanding where they're making money and putting the resources into securing and growing that part of the business. And after that, through profit mapping, which we've talked about a bit earlier and we'll talk about again, it becomes very easy to recognize that in the marginal part of business, the so-called sea of red ink, there are probably a few different segments. And for each segment, there's one or two critical profit levers that will make all the difference between unprofitability and profitability. It may be order consolidation. It may be working with the customers to understand the products better. There's just a variety of things, but one or two things will usually turn around different parts of that sea of red ink, different segments. You don't need exact information to figure out where this is and what to do. 70% accuracy is plenty good enough in order to turn it around. The other really big thing is turnaround management. You have an image of a man or woman coming in on a big white horse, sword slashing and burning, chainsaw Al, that sort of thing. In my mind, if that happens, the company hasn't done a good job of managing profitability and probably will lapse back into its bad habits right away. In my experience, for a company to be really, really profitable, it's much more like deciding to get healthy by eating good food and getting good exercise at the health club. It's something where if you get the four key points right, the company just gets better and better. And I've seen companies triple their stock price. I've seen 20, 30, 40, 50% improvement within a year. The process generates cash. It doesn't require cash. You don't need a big, expensive computer system. Just clarity on what to do in organization. What I've seen in companies that have done this, that they're people, they're all hardworking, they're all caring, but they're less productive than they might be because they don't have the tools that they need to succeed. By getting these four key things right information, right priorities, right processes, and right compensation, the company just simply becomes better and better and better. And I think it's transformational leadership at its finest, where the top management of the company is providing tools and enabling the very hardworking, caring people in the company to be enormously more productive for the same amount of caring and work. And in my mind, that's the essence of really great transformational leadership.
Great. Well, let's talk a little bit about profit mapping as a tool to get started on understanding what business is profitable and what business is not profitable. Your book looks at this as a way to expose ways to improve profitability on the customer level. Why is this tool more effective than other methodologies out there?
You have to take a step back into a little bit of the history of accounting, and goodness knows I'm not an accounting historian, but accounting was developed centuries and centuries ago. And the purpose of accounting is to report accurately the overall financial performance of a company. Basically, put the revenues in one pile and the costs in another pile, and the difference is your profits, more or less. Very simple way to think about it. So for years, people have used that, and it gives very accurate results, even to this day, on the performance of a company. The problem, though, is that there are two types of accounting. There's financial reporting, which I just described, and management control. When a company has a lot of really great financial information, they simply assume that that's what you use for management control because it is accurate and it is very well compiled. The problem is that it's not granular enough because you've combined the revenues and combined the costs. So what you need to do is a very different sort of process that I call profit mapping. To get a quick assessment, you can take a sample of maybe 2 months of every transaction, that is to say every order line in the company. Everything I sold 3 of item A to customer 617. That would be an example of an order line. And then you essentially do a net profit, a P&L on that order line. So you know the revenues, you know the cost of goods sold, you know whether the customer was a field sales customer or a telesales or a web customer, you know how they ordered, and so on and so forth. You know whether the product was a fast, medium, or slow mover. You can multiply that by the value, and you get a sense of the inventory carrying cost. You know how far the customer was from the warehouse, so you get a sense of the delivery. You can set up a number of fairly easy-to-do tables and just simply run the transaction through the tables and do a net out. The long and short of it is that you wind up with the net profit of every transaction. And then you know who the customer is and who the product is. And then you can put that into a database. And it's astonishing. The islands of profit just jump off the page. And the sea of red ink is absolutely obvious. And it'll be obvious what the differences in cost factors are that are driving the sea of red ink. Now, what's also important here is that even in your most profitable customer, maybe a quarter of the products will be really very unprofitable. Using the technique of profit mapping, you can understand exactly why and what to do to turn it around in a very precise way. This product and this customer, we have a problem with the volatility of the order pattern or lack of substitutes. You can identify exactly the issue, and you can inform the salespeople and tell them how to change it. And then you can create essentially a red, yellow, green chart telling them what the highest impact actions are. Virtually everything that's good for us is good for the customer. In the old days, when the only factor that we had in play was price, it was what we call a zero-sum game. I win, the customer loses. The customer wins, I get less money. Today, virtually all of the factors that determine profitability are operational. And in that case, what's good for the customer reduces my costs at the same time.
Thank you, Jonathan, for joining us today.
Well, thank you very much, Lindsay. I appreciate the opportunity.